Welcome to Vassals of Kingsgrave. This episode will be dedicated to the popular movie and book Gone with the Wind. My name is Glenn, and Dagos Rivers from the forums, and joining me is Bina 007.
Hi, everybody.
So for those that don't know, I guess just a brief description of the plot. It's a book which was published in 1936, and the book focuses on the main character, Scarlett O'Hara, as she goes from husband to husband during the American Civil War and Reconstruction period. Eventually, so she marries three husbands and has a child by each husband, all at the same time pining after a man that marries his cousin. So she is in love with Ashley Hamilton, and he marries his cousin Melanie Hamilton. And let's say that would be my just brief description of the plot. But anything to add, Bina?
It's interesting because you've described it all in terms of the love story. So I would probably say it's a novel that starts off in the Old South before the Civil War and takes us in the eyes of this young girl through seeing the destruction of the South, Sherman's march to the sea, and then we see the reconstruction of the South and how these old Southern families try to survive in this new kind of rapacious world.
Did you read the book first, or did you watch the movie first?
I watched the movie first when I was quite young, maybe 10 or so, and then read the book also maybe quite close after that. And I remember being quite at the age of like 11, being quite shocked. I think it was the longest book I'd ever read at that point, and feeling very, very upset about the ending. Like, seriously, is that after? I remember very indignantly going to school and telling my history teacher at the time, like very proudly, that I just read this 1,100-page book, but I was really like pissed off with the ending. And also being quite shocked at how much more bleak and how much more history there is compared to the movie. How about you?
Well, I would say that I watched the movie first, and it was back in the days when I used to frequent the IMDb boards, and I used that website a lot. I looked at this feature that it had, which is top 250 films, and I would look through that and look to that for movie recommendations, things to watch.
Okay.
And I remember that Gone for the Wind, I suppose that was like somewhere in the top 200 at the time. So I heard about that. Then that's when I first heard about it. But then I don't think I watched it until I was looking at like top grossing films of all time. And let's see, so they have this thing where Gone for the Wind, that's supposedly the highest grossing if you adjust for inflation, even though that's it's really because it's been released so many times, so it's hard to really say which one is the most popular. But
yeah, but I mean, I think it's fair to say that whether it technically is the top grossing, I mean, Gone with the Wind, both as book and movie, was an absolute commercial sensation, wasn't
huge
it?
success, yep.
Just an instant mega hit, and very cleverly marketed, I think, by the original publishers as well, who, I was reading this thing, apparently they took out an ongoing one-page ad in a big sort of Sunday newspaper, and every week would sort of put that week's sales figures in, just to keep hammering home what a sensation it was, to make people think that if they hadn't read it, they were being left out somehow.
There was this documentary, I guess it would have been maybe around 2006 or 2007, and it was looking at, from the UK, the top movies at the cinema, like the top movies to sell the most tickets. And Gone with the Wind, that was number one with like 30 million, and the closest one was Titanic, I think, at number two with 12 million.
That's so depressing. But I mean, that's a huge margin, right, of outperformance.
Absolutely,
It's
huge margin.
It's not even coming close, Titanic. Doesn't surprise me. I mean, I rewatched it kind of recently, just on Netflix, I think, and it still holds up. Like, for whatever doubts you have about some material, it's still absolutely captivating, I think.
And I was reading that they were planning to split it into two movies because of the long. It would have been close to 3.5 hours in length. Well, in fact, it did go through a lot of script changes because the original draft would have been about 5 hours long, and then they cut some things. But at one point, they were planning to make it into two movies. So I respect their decision that they, stuck with one movie.
But in those days, you had more of those epic style films, didn't you, that came complete with the curtains being raised and a proper intermission. Things like Lawrence of Arabia or, Cleopatra, which probably brought that era of the big epic to an end. But it just felt like going to the movies was a bigger deal and it was an event. And so people had greater tolerance for a movie almost being like theatre, where you'd sit down for 3.5 hours with an intermission. Amazing.
Yeah, we don't have those intermissions anymore.
No, sometimes I feel you kind of need them, actually. It's amazing how a lot of these summer blockbusters are now crawling back towards that 3-hour mark. But, yeah.
But that's how I heard of the movie. So I think I decided to watch it when I was 15. And I had, at the time, I had TCM.
Mm-hmm.
And I seen that it was going to be on at 9 p.m. and I was going to watch it. But then I gave up after about 1 hour or so. So it wasn't. Then I tried again. Then I think I watched the entire thing. Then I think when I was 17, I decided to read the book. So I just borrowed a copy from a local library, but I gave up after about 80 pages. Then didn't go back to the book until I was 22, and that's when I read the full thing.
And yet, so an additional question is, you proposed Gone with the Wind as a topic for Vassals of Kingsgrave. So what is it about it that made you, after struggling to get into the book and the movie, what brings you to really want to discuss it?
I think it's a book and movie which I feel compelled to watch again and read again. And I feel that it has this timeless quality to it, that it can be watched by everyone.
I agree.
And
I think
it can be picked up by new generations as well.
It's absolutely amazing to me that it's such a particular novel set in a particular time, and yet there's something really magnetic about it. It's one of those movies, I think, that if it ever, I rarely sort of set out to watch it, but if I'm flicking channels maybe on a Sunday afternoon and it's on, it's quite hard to break away from it. I don't reread it as often as I maybe do other novels, but yeah, it's just tremendous. And I'm always shocked at how, I guess, and we know each other through podcast of Ice and Fire, and that's genre fiction. I'm always amazed at how scornful some of the early reviews and continuing reviews are of Gone with the Wind, like it's just a woman's story or a romance story, historical romance, and quite scornful about the style with which it's written. But I just feel something that popular for so long. I mean, surely that you've got to realize there's some value in it, that it can transfix people from all over the world 80 years after it was first written. I think Scarlett's one of the most fascinatingly written heroines because she is quite ambiguous and she's quite, her motherhood, right? And we can get into that. That's a very interesting thing that's kind of almost entirely removed from the movie. I remember being quite shocked when I read the book for the first time. Oh my God, she had like kids with these previous husbands.
Have you heard of the game Say Anything?
No.
Oh, well, Say Anything is just this card. Well, it's sort of a card game. Within each card, there are maybe 5 questions. So one player reads one of the questions to 3 other players, or depending, it can be up to 6 players, I think. But one player reads the question to the other players, and they have to answer the question however they like, and then the player can decide who has the best answer and is given a score based on that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions from a few weeks ago when I played it, it was the most memorable movie character, and I said Scarlett O'Hara, and this shocked me because my friend was like, "Who is that?" And it shocked me because he does own a copy of Gone with the Wind, and that's why I picked up the book again, because I was staying at his flat and noticed he had a copy, and I just picked it up and read some of it. I thought, I should pick this up again and read the rest of it. And I had thought he had read the book too. So it just shocked me that he didn't know who the character was.
Well, I was kind of surprised when you suggested it as a topic because it's always painted as being a kind of a woman's book because it is all about, the melodrama of miscarriages and, teenage romances and all that sort of stuff. And I was pleasantly surprised, I have to say. But I also think it's probably quite interesting that we haven't had other people from the forum as keen to discuss it as they would be, say, a popular TV show. And I wonder whether Gone with the Wind has become the sort of thing that people are vaguely aware of, but whether, like, the newer generations are even still reading and watching it. I wonder whether it will finally fall out of favour.
I feel like from a few years ago, I was reading something about Titanic, and they were saying, why is this so popular? And they said, let's say so within, it may have been a forum I was reading this in, but it was the fact that they can reach so many demographics. And I feel like Gone with the Wind can do that too, because it's, it's so many genres. It can be considered as a romance, but it can also be considered as a war film and also a historical film. And,
agreed.
There are some humour moments too, and drama.
So does it even make sense in this context to ask what the lemon cake ratings are? I'm guessing we're probably both at like nearly a 5.
No, yeah, absolutely 5. Well, I would, because I always hold merit over the book. The book to the movie, I would say maybe the movie would be possibly 4.5, and the book would be a 5.
I agree with you, actually. And I think that I appreciate that the movie is, the movie in a way is kind of more honourable than the book because there is a sense in which Selznick does try to soften some of the kind of race relations stuff. But there's just something wonderfully rich and baggy and brilliant about the book. And yeah, definitely 5 out of 5 lemon cakes for me.
Start with the main character, which is Scarlett O'Hara, Katie Scarlett O'Hara. Oh, did you know about... So the author originally had other ideas for the name of the main character?
Yeah, apparently she was originally called Pansy.
What an awful, awful idea.
And maybe we bring kind of modern sensibility to that, but my word, like compared to Scarlett, it's such a brilliantly kind of radical, vivid name. It totally matches the character. Yeah, I can't imagine Scarlett as a pansy. So good editing. Just goes to show good editors are worth their weight in gold.
And also, I was reading on SparkNotes, they said that one idea for the main character would have been Prissy Hamilton.
Oh, no. That's terrible.
A second thing is, I'm not sure if this is a fact, if this is actually a real thing, but I can remember reading somewhere that originally it was going to be Melanie Hamilton as the main character of the story, but then the author decided, so Scarlett O'Hara was maybe a secondary character, but they changed it so that Scarlett would be the main character of the novel.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually, because I have read an interview with Margaret Mitchell where she says that, she loves Scarlett, and definitely Scarlett's the protagonist, but that the closest the movie comes to a heroine is Melanie. Like, she's a side character, but ultimately she's the one who has that goodness, and she's the moral center, and that at times of real strife, she does prove to have a steel backbone, so that even Scarlett eventually comes to admire her. But she's kind of, it's almost like it's a novel that Scarlett and Rhett aren't really conventional hero and heroine. They're very flawed characters. Scarlett's very narcissistic and self-involved and kind of stupid at times. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think that's something that's really interesting about the book.
It gives it a unique approach to the novel, and also it makes it stand out as having a character like that as the main protagonist of the novel.
Yeah, and I suppose the closest we come to it is maybe Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. And I think contemporary reviewers always accused Margaret Mitchell of maybe sort of borrowing some of that story, but I think she only read Vanity Fair after she'd written it. But again, when Thackeray wrote Vanity Fair, he subtitles it a novel without a heroine or hero. But Scarlett is, I mean, she is a heroine in some respects. I think, the way she survives the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. I mean, she displays tremendous courage. It's almost her only virtue, but it's a very important one.
Well, I feel like she has other virtues. She has...
Oh, go on then. Tell us the virtues of Scarlett, Glenn.
Well, there is the fact that, so when Melanie is sick and wounded after the childbirth and they arrive home to Tara, and she's trying to get up and saying, "Oh, Scarlett, let me help." And she's like, "Don't talk nonsense, Melanie, because if you help now, you'll get sick and you won't be able to help. Or if you try and help today, you won't be able to help tomorrow because you'll be sick for even longer." So I think that's wisdom, a good wisdom approach to that.
But she's quite harsh in how she delivers that message, isn't she? I mean, and certainly that's much more obvious in the film in the way that she's played, but by Vivien Leigh. She's almost like the way she treats Melanie and even the sort of the black servants at Tara and Ashley, it's kind of like she realizes she's the only one who's got the gumption and the fortitude to stop them all from starving. And okay, she does help them all because they're part of her, part of Tara, but she's quite scornful. Like she doesn't say, "Oh, don't work because I feel bad for you that you've just had this awful labor and that you're weak." It's very clear sight and it's wisdom, but it's delivered with a kind of, she treats them all like irritating little children and parasites that she has to care for. And maybe that's just how she sees them. But it's not necessarily virtue. I mean, she doesn't treat them kindly. She makes sure they don't starve, but there's no kindness there.
She could use some more tact.
Yeah, Scarlett O'Hara is not tactful.
Well, I was going to say that I thought that she had a good deal of appreciation. So when her father dies and she gives Pork his watch, her father's watch.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? And it's amazing because it shows. I think it's kind of interesting when I was rereading it that the attitude Scarlett has towards her, towards the slaves when she's at Tara, is much more familial. She accepts them as being part of the family that's at the plantation, and she shows real sympathy. And yet when she goes to Atlanta, it almost like brings the worst out of her. She starts treating slaves or people that were formerly slaves in the way that other people, white people in Atlanta, would treat them. So in Pork in particular, when other people are being very cruel about him, she kind of agrees. That's a really good example of how she takes on some of the harshness of Atlanta society. She's much more herself when she's at the plantation. But yeah, that's true. And she loves Mammy. I mean, I think genuinely she loves Mammy, right? And she loves her mother, and I think she always idealizes and wants to be like her mother as the ideal Southern lady. Problem is that she's just not temperamentally suited. So my question I was going to try and raise on this podcast is, how far do you think she in her mind, I always feel Scarlett thinks that experience of extreme hunger and vulnerability at Tara after the war she thinks of that as the justifying act, that okay, now I'm going to go to Atlanta and I'm going to do whatever it takes to survive, even if that means robbing my sister of her fiance, and I'm going to use convict labor and I'm going to sell shoddy lumber, but by God, I'll never go hungry again. And it's kind of allows her to be, a woman in a man's world and become a businesswoman and be quite ruthless. How far do you think it's true that it was that hunger at Tara that made that shift in her personality? Or do you think she was just always that way and that this was just a convenient excuse to show her true self?
I think she has always placed a value on Tara, and if her parents had died earlier, then she would have fought to keep Tara. And so that's one of the things. So she marries Frank so that she can save Tara from Jonas Wilkerson.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also reminds me of Old Miss.
So then my other question would be, why do you think Scarlett likes Ashley Wilkes?
Oh, that was something I was going to mention, but I didn't want to mention the movie again. But it's so the book explains that there is a bit of a story between Ashley and Scarlett, that you could almost think that they were courting each other before the story takes place. But in the movie, it feels like she's oblivious to Ashley, and she only thinks about him once she learns that he is to be married, and it becomes this story where she's in the pursuit of Ashley just because she can't have him, whereas she can have everyone else, the Tarleton boys, the Fontaines, whoever, but she cannot have Ashley.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's and I think that is unfair to her. I don't think it is a Stenessa. I think the book is much more fair to her. I think she genuinely was swept off her feet by him, and that there was a little bit of wooing going on. And I've always felt that Ashley was a little bit unfair to Scarlett, because he knew he was never going to be able to marry her, because he'd always have to marry Melanie, because that had been, they'd been betrothed, Stark-like. And yet he was obviously attracted to her vitality and to the fact that she was everything he wasn't. And I feel bad for her, because I feel her whole life has been blighted by this kind of youthful, romantic yearning for Ashley. And maybe if she hadn't been so deluded about Ashley, she could have been happy with Rhett. I mean, probably not with any of her other husbands. So I always feel that bit in the book where he apparently has been courting her before the book opens is really important, because it makes her seem less capricious and just wanting him because she can't have him.
Do you feel that Ashley was forced to marry Melanie by his family?
Yeah, because I think there's always all these kind of, like the Tarleton twins always say that, oh, those Hamiltons are always queer, and it's probably because they're from Virginia and people up there are odd. And they always intermarry. So the whole kind of community, almost including Gerald O'Hara, right? He warns Scarlett. He says, they're going to get married. Everyone knows that. And then I think Ashley Wilkes was forced to marry Melanie. But then again, I think he was happy to do so, because he has that speech where she kind of goes to the barbecue and thinks, oh, well, maybe he just hasn't asked me because he doesn't think I love him. So she declares her love, and he says, you know what, of course I'm attracted to you, but at the end of the day, that's not enough for a marriage, and you're just too wild and too much for me, and it would never work, and I need someone calmer and quieter. So I think he's forced to marry Melanie because the families expect it, but I think he's quite relieved maybe to marry Melanie as well.
There doesn't seem to be any repercussions for Charles when he discards Honey Wilkes and decides to marry Scarlett. That's what I always think of. Like, you don't ever hear anything about how they are cousins and they were to be married, but Charles decides to marry Scarlett.
So you think that if Ashley had refused to marry Melanie and married Scarlett instead, it would have been okay?
I think, well, it's hard to say. It just, so emphasis is placed on the fact that they are cousins, and that's why Ashley has to marry Melanie, but there doesn't seem to be any requirement on Charles to marry Honey Wilkes.
It's true. Yeah, I never thought about it that way. Or maybe it's just part of that whole rush around in the moments before the war starts that allows people to get away with stuff like that. Because normally there would have been a year-long engagement, but suddenly it's okay to have an immediate marriage. And yeah, it's a good point though. But my interpretation was always that Ashley was secretly relieved not to have to marry Scarlett, that he recognized that she was just way too wild for him to handle. So, but I always find it, I just always found it weird that someone as vital, and like you said, in some ways as kind of world wise as, I mean, in some ways she can be quite dumb, but in some ways she can be really clever and cunning, that she would fall for someone like Ashley. Like, why would someone that vital and passionate and no nonsense fall for someone kind of almost as drippy as Ashley? This very kind of effete, sort of Southern gentleman. I just always thought, you look at Scarlett and you think, well, why on earth wouldn't she just fall for Rhett Butler? But maybe it's part of the same reason that she kind of, as much as she's basically taken after the Irish Gerald O'Hara side, maybe it's the same reason that she kind of really admires her mother as this perfect Southern lady. Maybe she thinks if she marries Ashley Wilkes, the perfect Southern gentleman, that she too will become a lady. Don't know.
And Ashley is from a well-respected family compared to Rhett, who is disowned by his own family.
True.
And has a terrible reputation.
Yeah, the Charleston rogue. It's true. It's true.
I do love the part where Scarlett sets the date of her wedding one day before Melanie and Ashley.
It's so perfect, isn't it? It's so perfect. Yeah, it's so real. I love Scarlett because I think in all her flaws and in all her vanity, she's just absolutely real and true, and that's why we still love reading about her. Do you think people give Scarlett an easy ride in the way that, you know, I've got my bugbear about people giving Arya and Tyrion an easy ride because they love her so much? Because she really does do some really horrific stuff.
Many awful things.
Yeah, like really, really horrible stuff.
The reason that she marries, so she sets about this plot to marry Frank Kennedy. It's because if Sue Ellen had married Frank, she doesn't believe that she would give the $300 to save Tara, because Sue Ellen is high maintenance and likes carriage rides and all of these things like materials and dresses, and all of the profit from the store would be eaten up by Sue Ellen's opulence.
Which we have no evidence of whatsoever.
Good point.
It's just complete nonsense. I suppose the only evidence we have is that when Tara's in a really hard position, Sue Ellen kind of refused to do any of the hard labour because she's a lady. But I just thought it was basically Scarlett knowing that she would be able to wrap Frank Kennedy around her fingers. But the other thing is, like, why hadn't Frank Kennedy and Sue Ellen already gotten married?
It's because Frank Kennedy didn't feel like he was on his feet yet after the war.
And yet he can marry Scarlett within a day.
Well, that was within 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Poor Sue Ellen. It's terrible. But, you know, just the way in which she runs her business, it's just horrible. And she's a really horrible mother as well. She's very mean.
So she does do some awful things, and she says some really rude and awful things, but I think people admire the fact that she can speak her mind, and she doesn't put up with other people. At that instance where Melanie is like, oh, let me help Scarlett, but she can barely walk, and you know, everyone thinks that from time to time, but they're too polite to say anything.
So she's the unlicensed version of Vassals.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's something true about that. She, like the way at the sort of the ball to raise money for the Confederate Army, where she says, never mind all this nonsense about mourning. If someone's going to give this much money, I'm going to, you know, have a dance with Rhett Butler. And also the other thing I always thought was quite interesting about Scarlett is where all these women are quite sort of patriotic in a very sort of simple, unthinking way in supporting their troops. And yet she thinks, oh, this war's just a tremendous hassle because it just means there's less men to dance with. She's very unashamed, isn't she? But very selfish. I mean, that's the flip side of that kind of brave, reckless, just saying what you want, never mind what society thinks, is also quite selfish and quite self-involved.
Yep, we can move on to Rhett Butler.
Ah, Rhett. The black sheep of Charleston. He's awesome. He's so funny. I always think of him as like the Jamie Lannister of this book because he sees things so clearly, like in comparison to everyone else. He immediately sees that he and Scarlett should get together and that they're the similar type of personality and that Ashley's completely useless and that his kind of person's going to be like eaten up by the war. And he always has these really funny, sardonic, ironic lines of comedy. And yet underneath it, he's kind of like Han Solo. He always comes back and does the right thing in the end. So I've got a lot of time for Rhett Butler, I have to say. I think a more interesting question about Rhett is kind of near the end when the marriage is all obviously fading. And he has this long speech where he says to Scarlett, I wanted to pet you, like I wanted to be the guy who protects you and allows you to be a lady while I'm your protective gentleman. And you never let me do that because you'd already become so strident. And I always wonder if Rhett is basically as deluded about Scarlett as she is about Ashley. Like whether he wanted her to be something that she could never be. So it's a doomed love affair in that respect.
I think it seems like he's in love with the fact that Scarlett is a petulant child at times. And he likes that quality about her. And he likes to spoil people. So he liked Scarlett back when he could buy her fancy hats and take her to dances. Then once she had Bonnie, he had a replacement so he could have push all his care towards Bonnie. And then over time, he has just grown tired of Scarlett and her antics.
So you think he kind of just sort of falls out of love with her?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. Just that close-up proximity. But I also think that what he fell in love with when he first saw her is that kind of feisty young girl who, throws a porcelain pot across the room. And that is very attractive. That's what we all love about Scarlett. But then when he finally marries her, she's been through so much and she's had to become so much tougher and harder. And I feel he's almost a little bit unfair to her. Like he wants her to be like she was back in the day. And when he takes her on the honeymoon and he's buying her all the clothes, like you say, then she is that. But once they get back to Atlanta, then she's just back to what she was in the Reconstruction after the war, when she just had to be really tough. And it's just so sad and tragic, that marriage. It really is.
But then again, I also think that they will get back together.
Do you? Okay.
Because here's my justification. So I don't think that towards the end of the novel, it would be. He does mention that he won't divorce her, and he will visit, so that the neighbours won't talk, so there won't be any more scandals affecting Scarlett. So I feel like so they won't get divorced, and then she can, I don't know, I guess, despite all that Scarlett has done, he has always came back, so he'll come back again.
And she'll woo him back. I don't know. I always interpreted that tomorrow's another day and I'll go home to Tara as I realised I never loved Ashley. He was a dream I invented. I realised I never loved Rhett because he was just a convenient guy. And I'm going to go back to Tara because actually Tara and the land is what I've always loved. And I always thought when Rhett left, he saw clearly for the first time that he's done to Scarlett what she did to Ashley. And I always kind of thought they would never, maybe not divorce, but they wouldn't get back together, which is why I was so bitterly opposed to the idea of a sequel to the book. But that's the glory of it, right? I mean, we can all interpret it whichever way we want. I like it more as a sort of doomed melodrama where they would never get back together.
I like when he is in the Yankee prison and Scarlett comes with the dress, which is she designed herself after the drapes. So she's trying to pretend that Tara is going well, that she's not working the fields, but then he notices her hands and...
Yeah, never player.
Yeah.
It's one of those delicious moments where Scarlett is really quite stupid and thinking she could pull that off. And that's in a way what makes Scarlett really fascinating and lovable, is that because if she was just always right and cynical and ironic and bullshit, then she'd be kind of interesting, but she wouldn't be as, you've got to see her vulnerable sometimes. And that moment, especially the way they do it in the movie, where Rhett kind of calls her out on her behaviour, is just so excruciatingly painful to watch. But it does make us love her even more because she's so vulnerable in that moment.
And then she offers to sleep with him in a
Yeah.
subtle way. And
Well, not that subtle, actually. And it's kind of interesting how in a movie of that time they managed to get in quite an explicit offer, right? I mean, do you think she really would have gone through with it for Tara?
I think yes, I think she would. But also, I think she would hope for more, so it wouldn't just be just for the $300. It would be for next year's taxes. It would be for more dresses, more
She'd rate
shoes and
herself highly than that.
hats and things.
Oh dear. And how do you, so how do you interpret the really famous scene between the two of them where they've had this massive argument basically about Ashley and he quote unquote rapes her, or I don't know how you want to interpret it.
It's not rape. That's angry rape sex.
Oh my word.
So
We're just getting into such difficult territory now, aren't we?
So I was talking about this to a friend a few weeks back, and it's just this. Right, so I was watching this interview with cast members of Queer as Folk, and they were talking about this scene in season 5 where the two lesbians, they're getting in this really huge fight about the fact that they're separated but they're still living in the same house, and they're talking about bills, and so suddenly one of them just grabs the other and throws her against the wall, starts kissing her and tearing off her clothes, and then suddenly they have sex. So that's like that common TV trope or movie trope where you have two characters arguing and suddenly they lunge for each other and get passionate and start having sex.
You see, my interpretation is that he wants to rape her, like he wants to humiliate and hurt her as she has humiliated and hurt him over the whole Ashley thing. And that it's nothing to do with him. It doesn't excuse him, the fact that she actually secretly gets off on it. Like she likes being dominated in that way and finds it actually at first very scary and dark, but then very exhilarating. That his intention was rape. It's just that she's so messed up that she actually rather enjoys it.
And then he tries to apologize the next day, but
but she's loving it, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of a moot point. Because she's very weird, isn't she? She's this woman who she wants to have her cake and eat it. So she wants to be the strident, radical, I'm not a sort of prisoner of convention woman who I speak my mind, I do as I want to do, and I play with men like toys. But at the end of the day, a large part of her fantasy around Ashley is that she wants to be swept off her feet by a big manly man. And I think there's something about Rhett finally just taking that action that for her is part of some kind of messed up sort of, I want to be dominated by my husband fantasy. It's a very weirdly written, because obviously Margaret Mitchell has to be so careful at that time of what she shows and what she says. And similarly with the film, actually. It's a very, very weird scene. And in the movie version, I mean, Vivian Leigh the next morning looks like the cat that's got the cream. It's just hilarious, that moment. That scene where she wakes up and sort of uncurls herself in bed and looks absolutely, on top of the world. It's very, very weird. Do you think Ashley's either A, impotent, B, gay?
Well, he's not impotent.
Well, not impotent because he does father kids, but
yes.
kind of maybe frigid, I don't know what the word would be, but just less than a man. And or do you think he's gay? Because there's all this talk about that family being queer and him being queer and not quite fitting in with the other men. So there are theories out there that he was basically, Melanie was a beard.
I don't think I've ever thought about it.
Okay.
So
I'm just doing my best to come up with crackpot theories.
Yeah, that's fine.
Quentin is alive.
No, well, it does strike me that there are no gay characters in this novel, and I guess that's a sign of the times, because I'm sure if it was written today, there would be like hints or something.
But then again, think of when this novel was written, right? I mean, this novel was written in the 30s, and so that is the period of literature of the modernist movement. So this is the era of T.S. Eliot, and it's the era of Evelyn Waugh and Faulkner and who else? This is the era when you would have people writing about, thinly veiled or even more explicitly. I mean, D.H. Lawrence, right? I mean, you did have people tackling stuff like that. the fact that Margaret Mitchell has written a much more sort of almost sort of socially conservative, almost sort of 19th century type, one of these big epic novels. It's almost kind of old-fashioned relative to when it was written, I think. So I think the fact that she doesn't have gay characters isn't because people at that time weren't writing about gay characters, but that she as an author from that part of the South writing that type of novel wasn't going to have one.
That's a good point, yep.
Then again, I think Ashley's probably closet gay with no real evidence.
Oh, I did love the line where they're talking about, he says something about how it feels wrong to have these convicts work for us, and Scarlett said, but you had slaves. He's like, well, that was different.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no time for Ashley Wilkes. I think he's just complete. I'm totally with Rhett Butler. I think he's completely and utterly pointless as an exhibit. He's good at all the stuff, but he always, does he really want the old South lifestyle back? He didn't enjoy the hunting and fishing and shooting and barbecuing. He was out of sorts with it. He wanted to go off and read his books, and he's just pointless. I mean, he stands around in frilly shirt and he doesn't even know how to chop logs when they're in Tara. And he's just a total and utter parasite. And to make things worse, he never has the balls to just tell Scarlett and cut her loose, because ultimately I think he knows that he relies on her for survival. I mean, I find Ashley to be he's a real parasite, and I think, gets too much of a free ride from people. There you go, character assassination over. I don't see one good thing that he does. Whereas Melanie starts off and she looks about as drippy as Ashley when she's first presented. But Melanie has real gumption. And okay, it's kind of stupid of her to offer to help when she's like very sick, but at least she offers. Like, she's up for doing anything, no matter how hard, whether she can physically cope. And when there's the kind of the Yankee comes to their house, she does, she can defend herself with a gun when it's needed to be done. And the way in which she makes a friendship with Belle Watling shows that she's able to step out of societal norms when needed. I've got a real respect for Melanie, a quiet respect for Melanie, but Ashley I find a complete waste of space. And there's that wonderful scene in the movie where she basically entirely covers up for the fact that they've been out, and is willing to damage her own reputation to do it. It's a wonderful performance actually in the movie. It's not very often praised. And a really interesting character role.
So she is told that she can never have children again, but she still wants to have a child and damage her health towards the end of the movie, towards the end of the book too, where she ignores those warnings and says, "I'm going to have a child." She feels like she can't do anything else besides be a mother.
And maybe that's just so part of her feeling of what a Southern lady is and like a wife is, that if she can't have a child for Ashley, then what use is she? And doesn't Scarlett use that at one point as a sort of bargaining tool with Ashley? Like, I can give you children. I'm vital.
She does use that, yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's which is the lowest kind of jibe you can use, I think. But no, yeah, I've got tremendous respect for Melanie. And I can see why, I mean, in a way she is. She's the moral center of the novel. I mean, I guess you could maybe say, is she too good to be true? Like, how convincing is she as a character? But I like to think that she could be real, that there are people who have that mix of goodness, but also a bit of steel in them.
I would like to believe that too.
Never met any, but I'm sure there somewhere. The representation of race is problematic. All these, it just sort of feels like in the Old South, all the slaves were lovely, willing house slaves who were part of the family and beloved, and you could have a joke with them. And
it always makes me mad, because have you heard of Song of the South?
Nope.
So, Song of the South is this Disney film from 1946. It also stars Hattie Mcdaniel.
Okay.
So the movie, it was released in 1946, and moderate business, I suppose. But then it was released to VHS a few times, But in 1986, they decided, right, let's put this back in the vault and we'll never release it again because of the depiction of slavery in the film.
Okay.
And it makes me think of this film. So it makes it seem like this film can get away with it. Gone with the Wind can get away with it because it's so popular. But a lesser film can't get away with that.
Yeah, I think
And I guess
it's
maybe
true.
because it is from Disney.
But there are lots of things like that, aren't there? Like, you could say, should you listen or watch a Wagner opera? Because especially if you watch, I mean, there are certain characters that seem and themes that seem very anti-Semitic and its associations with the Nazi regime. But I think there are some works of art where, and you kind of, they transcend the problematic material. Like, it is really problematic. And I could, if there were people who refused to read this because of its depiction of race, I think they would be totally justifiable in doing so, and I wouldn't try and argue against them. But I think it would be a shame to lose the baby with the bathwater in a way. I can't imagine what it must have been like to have been a black actor or actress being like taking a well-paid job in a big film, so why would you not take it? But having to play such subservient characters. And even I'd love to know, I mean, I should read more about it. How did Hattie Mcdaniel really feel about playing this Mammy character and getting the Oscar and yet not being able to go to the Atlanta sort of premiere because, she's coloured, so she can go into the theatre as one of the stars. I mean, it's incredibly problematic.
I know that is a sad story. And did you know about Clark Gable wanted to boycott, and Hattie phoned Hattie phoned Clark Gable to say, please attend, and I'm sick, so I can't go.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to Clark Gable. What a good guy. Apparently, also there's a story that on set of making the film, all the coloured actors got together and said that they would not. They went on strike until the toilets became unsegregated because they had segregated bathrooms on
Oh
set.
wow, I've not heard that one.
And there's also the actress in particular who plays Prissy, who's the most kind of childlike and infuriating of the slave characters, was actually incredibly intelligent and would sit on set reading the equivalent of the Financial Times and, reading all this very highfalutin stuff and then have to go on set and act like this kind of, completely idiotic, childlike, dependent woman. And I just wonder what it must have felt like to sort of sublimate yourself in that way. I mean, I suppose maybe they felt that at least the movie didn't have the Ku Klux Klan glorified in it. I mean, there's some really horrible lines in the book that I'd completely forgotten about, where, Scarlett only respects her husband because he's died avenging her with the KKK. And, there's all sorts of slightly dodgy lines in there, as well as the problematic idea that all slaves are basically happy and that, it's kind of interesting the way Margaret Mitchell contrasts sort of pre-war sort of antebellum South with the Reconstruction. And antebellum South is very well ordered, and the house slaves are part of the family. And, the slaves are always depicted as either childlike or animal-like. Like the imagery is really horrible, sort of showing Mammy as being sort of like an elephant moving from one foot to the other. So this really kind of patronizing, disgusting imagery. And yet it's all very well ordered and everyone's happy. And then after the war, you have Reconstruction, and then obviously you have the sort of the freed slaves, and they're seen as now having this violence unleashed. And so the people of Shantytown, you can have this, and it's all this horrible Ku Klux Klan type, misogynation and sort of rape of white women. I find it incredibly disappointing that in 1936, whenever this was released, she felt the need to still have a black and white rape scene. I think that's horrible. But what do you do? I mean, it's a really interesting question. Should we not be reading Gone with the Wind? Should we be boycotting it? I don't know.
Well, that's, I guess, similar to censorship. And I never approve of censorship. Or, I feel that everyone should be entitled to read whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, my attitude is you read it as a document as much about the Civil War as you read it it's a good document to show you attitudes in the 30s. Like, you know, it's good to know that, to remind yourself if you take it for granted that, you know, most sort of scandalous levels of racism are over in our society, then it's good to not be complacent. And if you read a book like Gone with the Wind and think, my God, this was only 80 years ago this was written, or it was only 80 years ago when Hattie Mcdaniel couldn't, you know, attend premieres because she was black, then that's valuable of itself, I guess. It's good to be upset by it and to remind yourself to be upset by it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Because I can't not watch the film. It's just too good a film. But it is. But it is occasionally just so painful.
I was trying to rack my brain to think of other examples of this, but these are the three that I could think of. So the first one, which was after Scarlett learns that yes, or Ashley does confirm that he will marry Melanie, and she thinks, how will this affect my reputation? Because people know that I have been flirting with Ashley, I have been spending a lot of my time with Ashley, and then she has that argument with Ashley, slaps him, then she sees Rhett, but then she leaves the library. But then she overhears the four girls talking about her and how men may flirt with a girl like that, but they don't marry them. And she thinks that this is her reputation ruined. But then after the Civil War is announced, Charles Hamilton proposes to her, and she thinks two things: that one, she can hurt Ashley by marrying his cousin. Second, she can hurt Honeywells, who is, I suppose, betrothed to Charles, who is also his cousin. By doing that, she can dissuade everyone talking about the fact that she was flirting with a man that didn't love her.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, and it's really funny how Scarlett always thinks of herself as being very no nonsense, and I'll tell it how I see it, and I don't care for these Southern conventions. But yet, at the same time, she does care about her reputation, and she does act to protect it with savage speed in this case.
Reputation. It's from this novel you can learn that it's very important.
Yeah, because it's your currency, isn't it? I mean, it's so much a part of what being seen as a lady and a gentleman is about. And I always think that's Scarlett's tragedy, that in order to preserve Tara, she kind of does everything she can to preserve it in a material sense, like getting the money, tarting it up and everything. And yet she loses her reputation as a lady. And that was what Tara was being about. Tara is nothing if it doesn't have a lady like Ellen to preside over it and to preserve those old Southern values. So she kind of, she fails in the end, I think, to preserve it in terms of preserving what it stands for, because it's all about reputation.
We are introduced to a character named Will Benteen, and he is a homeless ex-soldier of the war who you discover he turns up on Tara and offers to help with farming, just for food. So he would help with planting and the work on Tara. Then you learn that he has some feelings for Corinne, but then later on, very sad that you learn that Corinne is joining a convent because she can't get over her feelings for Brent Tarleton, who had one of the Tarleton twins in the beginning of the novel, who dies during the war. So you learn that Will is going to ask Sue Ellen to marry him, and it's all to do with the fact that Sue Ellen tries to convince her father to he sign an agreement to earn some money for his bonds, but it jeopardizes his values. But so Sue Ellen tries to get him drunk to do it, but then he realizes just in time, and then gets into a horse riding accident, and Sue Ellen Um, so Sue Ellen is feeling guilty about killing her father, and that's how the entire county will see it, that she's at fault for killing her father. So at the funeral, Will announces his engagement to Sue Ellen so that no one will then criticise Sue Ellen.
Which is a tremendously honourable act, really, when you think about it.
And then I guess the third one is just after, so during the time in which Scarlett is in mourning, we have mentioned it before, but she attends a bazaar to raise some fundraise for the hospital in which she volunteers. And Dr. Mead proposes a bidding war to dance with the lady of your choice. And a few of the soldiers donate $25 or so, but then Rhett donates $150 to dance with Scarlett, but she is in mourning, so this causes a huge scandal when she agrees to dance with him. Then the next chapter, she receives a letter from her mother and saying that her father is coming to collect her. So she sees her father, and then her father speaks to Rhett, but then gets drunk and gambles away all his money and loses it to Rhett. So then Scarlett makes a deal with him saying, if I can stay, I won't tell Mother about the fact that you gambled and lost your money.
Which is ironic considering that basically Gerald got Tara by gambling, right?
Exactly, yep. And he also got his first slave from gambling.
Exactly. I don't think Ellen is under any illusions about the kind of guy that Gerald is.
So that's one of the themes that I've noticed through the novel, the value of reputation. And a lot of characters, I guess these characters are smart because they can dissuade certain situations which could harm their reputation.
And even reverse it, right? I mean, I think one of the really fascinating things about Rhett is that when he realizes that the lack of reputation that he has is going to affect Bonnie Blue, that he does take quite superficial, like you kind of wonder that the old women of the town are falling for his charm offensive. But it really works, he will then be received. And I like the fact that he knows how to play that game in a way. And can do it when necessary. So all his kind of boyhood Charleston charm can be used in defense of something.
It is going to be Ashley's birthday party later that night, and she goes to the lumber business to see Ashley. But then she is caught in a friendly embrace by India Wilkes, and then she spreads the rumour that they were in a compromising situation, and the whole town learns it. So Rhett orders her to attend the party, because she's saying, "Oh, I'm too sick to go," but he's not putting up with it. So he forces her to go to the party, and that's
and again,
all.
Yeah, another occasion of Melanie being amazing and just, perceiving the situation clearly, taking Scarlett by the hand and showing the town that she believes in Scarlett and therefore they must too. It's amazing, very moving.
And she doesn't invite, or she tells India not to come to the party.
Yeah, exactly. So once again, I'm so full of admiration for Melanie.
Have you ever heard of Wendy's?
No, I haven't.
So it's in the Legend Lives On, Gone with the Wind documentary. It's on my DVD set. So it's the 5-disc collector's edition. And on the 5th disc is this documentary where they interview several cast members from the movie, but they also interview these obsessed fans with Gone with the Wind who do these strange things, like there's a Gone with the Wind convention next week in Ireland. They'll be booking their flights to it right now.
Yeah, but as a bunch of people who are obsessively into Song of Ice and Fire and therefore podcast about random stuff on a Sunday night, I don't think we can accuse them of doing weird things.
Good point. They do things like attend. One Wendy was talking about going to Ireland to see the Tara plantation. Another was talking about setting up. Well, attending the various museums and conventions throughout the years for Gone with the Wind, and going to a museum, an Atlanta museum, to see costumes and artifacts from the movie.
It's a very weird movie. It's softer than the book. It's less bleak than the book. It's much more about the love story. Beautifully cast, I think. Immensely popular. It's just it's technically, you forget actually how at the time it was incredibly technically accomplished. Like the way they did the burning of Atlanta, the vast backdrops, the beautiful score. It's just, I think it's one of the best movies of all time from a technical perspective. And I think, George Clooney got a lot of stick when at the Oscars one year, when he said that Hollywood deserved praise for giving Hattie Mcdaniel the Oscar and for being more forward-thinking than most of the country at the time. But I think he's right. I mean, I think it's a movie to be proud of insofar as Selznick did take out the KKK and Hattie McDaniel was recognised, even if ultimately she's playing a character that you can consider to be a bit of an Uncle Tom character, like a bit passive and loyal and unthinking. But at the end of the day, it was a huge breakthrough.
She did always say she would rather play a maid and be paid a lot of money for it than be a maid.
Yeah, and to that extent, I mean, she's playing the system, right? I mean, if that was... And at the time, like, I was reading all these reports. When she won the Oscar, she did a big tour, and she would go and introduce performances of Gone with the Wind at sort of cinemas in predominantly black areas in the cities. And apparently it did, if later... sort of, there were records of people like Malcolm X saying that he never got over seeing Gone with the Wind for the first time and how appalled he was by it. But at the time, her winning the Oscar apparently was a huge morale boost. I mean, it was a great source of pride that finally someone had broken that glass ceiling and gotten through and won it. So I think one shouldn't discount it now. At the time, it was a massive, massive thing, and good for her.
The next person to win an Oscar was Sidney Poitier in 1964.
Yeah, I mean, so long later. But at least that was for a movie that was more race conscious and was a product of its time, a much more radicalized time. You put down here the Scarlett O'Hara Wars.
Oh, that's another. So it's this, on the fifth disc of the set, there is this movie from 1980, I think, and it's this sort of like a parody of the casting search for Scarlett O'Hara, and they have all of these actors, like Tony Curtis is in it, but it's sort of like a TV movie. And so it starts with the initial publication of the book, and even before the book, they started the casting search for the main characters, and they were placing, a huge bidding war from other companies to secure the rights for the movie. And let's see, so from that point, they have interest from all of these actors, like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford.
Oh my word!
It's a really entertaining film, but so this, I guess, would be like the most famous search for a star of a movie. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I can't think of anything comparable. I mean, yeah, there's buzz about who's going to be the new Superman or whatever, but it's nothing like that. And deliberately so, it was very cleverly marketed.
And this casting search went on for 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely, because they were trying to find an unknown, and then they just ended up going with Vivien Leigh in the end. I'd love to know from someone American whether they think Vivien Leigh's Georgia accent's convincing or not. It always feels so to me, but I wouldn't be the best judge.
The only point where it doesn't is, I think there is a point where she does let her accent show, her British accent, and it's when she dances with Rhett Butler at the Bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
But I think other than that, then that's the only flaw with her performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's perfect. She's got exactly that kind of unpredictable, vivid, sort of selfish, childish, but very pretty, very attractive, and yeah, it's perfect. Apparently,
I love the story about how She was planning to do Wuthering Heights with
Hmm.
her partner at the time, Laurence Olivier. So she was in negotiations, but she couldn't be the lead of the movie. She could only secure like a supporting role, and so she said, "I don't want to be the supporting role. I want to be the lead." And she said the casting director for that said, "You would never find a better role in this in your debut." And it's almost like a fuck you. She she goes and gets like one of the biggest roles of all time.
But that's so in keeping. That's so in keeping for Vivian Leigh. Like, if you read, I've read some biographies of Laurence Olivier, and she was an absolute nightmare to live with. He had such a hard time with her. She was a complete handful, very willful, very Scarlett O'Hara. And he did kind of like Rhett fall out of love with her. And it's really interesting that when he married his second wife, he went for an actress, but someone who was definitely not a star in the way that he was a star. Someone of a much more sort of pliable, biddable, quiet. He almost went from Scarlett to Melanie in his two marriages. So
Because I did read something about the fact that he was jealous of her stardom.
yeah, absolutely. Because she absolutely eclipsed him with this film. You know, he was a serious actor, but he was also, I mean, he was the personality of the age. You know, he had a reach that was far beyond the theatre. And yeah, I think it caused problems. But I think it was more that, I mean, she really was psychologically quite difficult to deal with. And she was incredibly jealous. I mean, they were both jealous of each other. I think he was professionally jealous of her, and she was personally jealous of him. And it was an incredibly one of those really explosive, violent marriages, and came to a horrible end. So yeah, I think she was perfectly cast from that perspective.
You were talking about the sequel earlier, and I guess that's Scarlet, the book
Oh
Scarlet.
my word! Yeah, I haven't read it actually on
Oh, I
principle.
haven't either. So there are three sequels.
Really? Oh, okay. So I was talking about the officially sanctioned one that was quite recent, I think.
Oh right, okay. Let's see. The ones that I know of are Scarlet from 1994.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Then there is this one called Rhett Butler's People.
Oh, okay.
Then a third one is called The Wind Dawn Gone, which tells the story from the slaves' perspective.
Okay.
And I'm sure they're all horrible. I've seen copies of Scarlet and Rhett Butler's People in the library, and I think I picked them up, but didn't read more than 10 pages.
Oh dear.
It is relevant to A Song of Ice and Fire because people always talk about, well, the story continue if George dies before the series is over, and it's this is probably a good example of what happens when other authors continue the work of the original author. Maybe it was someone within her family that sanctioned the fact that they could do the Scarlet sequel.
Yeah, it was the estate, so to say. Shameless cash in. I've kind of read reviews of it which aren't particularly flattering. Like basically Scarlett O'Hara, I think, leaves. She goes back to Ireland to the original O'Hara, and
It's something about this plot about.
well, they have like makeup sex before she goes, and she has a kid. Then years later, he goes to Ireland and meets her, and he's like, "Why didn't you tell me I had a son?" And oh god, anyway. But they end up together basically.
There is this part where Corinne sells her shares to Tara to the convent, the church, something like that.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I don't think we should discuss the sequel. I'm just gonna have a.
Have you watched? So they did make a mini series of that sequel.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my word! I'm looking this up on IMDb now.
It's called.
So who played Scarlett?
Scarlett. 1994.
Oh my goodness, that's Scary Monsters. Look at it. It's here. I have to get this on DVD. Oh, Joanne Wally Kilmer as Scarlett O'Hara. Timothy Dalton, that's such a good choice, actually, as Rhett. That's actually not bad. Annabeth Gish as Anne Hampton Butler. Sean Bean. Does he die in the first episode? As Lord Richard Fenton. Oh my goodness, it's got Sean Bean. I'm going to have to get it now. Melissa Leo as Sue Ellen O'Hara Benteen. Cole Meany. I mean, this has got like a not entirely shitty cast. Series director. So the guy who directed it also did. What else did he do? A bunch of TV movies. He directed the Scarlett O'Hara War, by the way.
Oh, wow.
He directed some of Roots, some of MASH. Actually, it's not a bad. It's not a bad.
That is very reputable.
Pedigree, shockingly. Okay, maybe I'll have to come down from my pedestal. Try and procure a copy. I'm sure it was on Netflix or something dodgy. Oh, look, it was nominated for an ASC award from the American Society of Cinematographers for Outstanding Achievement in Cinematography in a Miniseries. And it won a Primetime Emmy. It won 2.
Oh, wow.
So there you go.
I've always heard bad things about it.
1 for art direction and 1 for hairstyling.
Oh, right. I take that back.
Yeah. Not actually for anything like acting or whatnot. But there you go. Okay, cool. I apologize for earlier dismissing it, and I will now go check it out. In terms of explaining its popularity, I was wondering why it was so resonant now, because apparently you can track, they've got all these like cool kind of movie financial websites where you can sort of track how popular movies are year by year. And I was thinking, like, in my geeky kind of economics is my day job kind of way, I was going to see if I could get a correlation between the popularity of Gone with the Wind and economic recessions. Because I think there's a sense in which at the time when it came out, it was popular because a lot of people during the Great Depression, it wasn't abstract, this concept of trying to save the farm and going hungry and having to work and being brought down low and having to just get the gumption and grit to carry on. And I think Scarlett O'Hara appealed to that Great Depression kind of group of people. And I think there's probably something about her absolute courage and will to go on and survive all the craziness. I'd love to know if the book becomes popular at times that are troubling like that.
Last week I was thinking of like movies or books which for certain life events. So I was thinking for like heartbreak, the movie would be Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Mm-hmm.
And for where like at moments where it feels like everything is lost or nothing is going how I want it to go, it would be Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, absolutely. Moments when you need personal courage, definitely.
Or motivation.
Yeah, I think so. That scene where she falls on the earth of Tara and takes it in her hands and says, I can do this. I think is really powerful, and it really sticks with you. And even just the final, the final scene of the film where she's apparently lost everything. She's lost her husband. She's lost her reputation. She's just lost a child. And she says, no, tomorrow's another day. There's something very can-do about that. Maybe something quite American, or the cliche of what it means to be American, that get up and go attitude. I think we'd all want to recognize something of that in ourselves at hard times. And it's very laudable.
And the movie has been released, I think 6 times so far. And each time it's always found an audience. It's found each release has been a good success.
Yeah, I hope we get one soon. I've never seen it on the big screen. I'd love to see it on a big screen.
So would you say you're a regular at Cineworld, for example?
Not at Cineworld specifically, but yeah.
So Cineworld did this thing a few years ago, and I know about it because I once had a Cineworld Unlimited card.
Okay.
So they did this thing called Classic Mondays, and they would bring back old classics and show them. One thing is that the title was misleading because it was not always Monday. Sometimes it was Tuesday, sometimes it was Wednesday, whatever. So, and also it wasn't every Monday. But they did. I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There was a showing of The Wizard of Oz, and I always hoped that they would show Gone with the Wind, but they didn't.
Yeah, I'm sure it will come back. I mean, like, I live quite close to what's now called the BFI South Bank, which is the British Film Institute, and they do repertory seasons where they still restore and bring back movies, and I'm sure it will happen that we get to that. Hence, they did the restoration of Heaven's Gate that we were talking about a few weeks ago. But I'd love, because it's one of those movies, it's like Lawrence of Arabia. It screams to be seen on a big screen. The cinematography is amazing. And some of those scenes, especially the Atlanta burning, is just stunning. Cool. So
moving on to the One Night Marry Scorpions game.
Yeah, what would be the equivalent of Scorpions in the world of Gone with the Wind?
Oh, good point.
An unaccompanied walk through Shantytown? I don't know. I mean, what's the...
A radish?
Oh, dear. Absolutely. Okay, One Night Marry radishes. And the radishes are for you.
So for Scarlett, well, she seems like a frigid bitch, so I think I'd take the radish.
Wow, that's the nastiest I've ever heard you be on a podcast. I think I'm surprised you say radish. I would have thought most guys would have been One Night. I mean, Marry, definitely not, right? She's so high maintenance. I think One Night. She's fascinating.
So for Rhett, I would love if he carried me up a staircase.
Oh.
I think, Marry.
Yeah, definitely. Rhett's the perfect guy, isn't he? He's a total rogue and a total convention buster, but at the end of the day, underneath it all, he's a romantic and a sort of an honourable man. So, yeah, all the way. Especially Clark Gable as Rhett. And indeed, that's even better.
I know the movie characters do colour your perception of the real characters. Like Ashley, so he actually sounds pretty hot, but the movie Ashley... not as much.
Although, yeah, but he was a huge star at the time, right? So,
just not age appropriate, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe. I think
Melanie sounds like marriage material.
Yeah, you'd have to marry Melanie, wouldn't you? I mean, she's quite boring, but she's going to be a great mum to your kids, and
sounds like she could lead a household.
Yeah, and she's kind of wet until it matters, and then she actually has strength. I've got so much respect for her. Ashley, it's radishes all the way. Total pointless. I have such contempt for Ashley.
I think for me, One Night for Ashley.
Really? Why?
Well, think about it. He's 25, handsome, from a good family. Well, wait, that's not relevant. But he's handsome. He's and it's only for one night. You don't have to put up with his shit, the next day.
Ashley, if you can do the middle finger option.
Oh yeah, to get his wealth and his social reputation, which is what Scarlett does to Charles Hamilton. She inherits all his money, and she only has to sleep with him like once.
Yeah, exactly. There's definite career climbing activity there. Charles Hamilton, I don't think we know enough to judge. I mean, he's a bit of a twat, isn't he, though? I mean, anyone who can give up the girl that he's really meant to marry just for Scarlett. I mean, and that goes for Frank Kennedy as well. I just find it really disgusting how these guys can give up their fiancés when this girl just flutters their eyelashes at them.
Well, I suppose there was a bit of deception with Frank Kennedy because I suppose he's on the rebound. Scarlett says that Sue Ellen is engaged to someone else.
Yeah, but come on, you've been engaged to this woman, you know her well. Are you really going to take the word of Scarlett O'Hara, who everyone knows is a bit of a flibbity-gibbet, I love that word. But I just find it so weak. I really do. It's pathetic. A real guy. Even Ashley.
even though he was on the rebound, he was, he did give a marriage proposal pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's very convenient for those guys. It's a good get out of jail card for
Charles Hamilton, he has no excuse though.
Yeah, that's just pathetic. What about Belle Watkins? Is it Watkins or Watling?
Well, Watling. Oh, right. So, I suppose if it was one night, I would have to pay her. So, I suppose Radishes.
I've got a soft spot for Belle Watling. She's a good woman, isn't she? She's a lot less radical than Scarlett. She never sort of questions sort of the way in which society condemns her. But yeah, I think Radishes.
I do admire that she tries to donate to the hospital. She tries to. She volunteers to give the men an alibi against the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, exactly.
And she does a lot of great, noble things.
And the fact that Melanie admires her, and I really trust Melanie's judgment. Yeah, I've got a lot of time for Belle Watling, as we're meant to. And I think it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that, people are accusing Margaret Mitchell of writing this sort of love poem to the Old South. Actually, it's the people that you wouldn't expect it who carry those virtues of honour. It's Belle Watling, it's Melanie. It's not the kind of the grand Southern gentlemen who are really the heroes. It's good. I'm really glad you suggested it, because it was a good excuse and prompt to go back and revisit it. And it was fun kind of reading around it again.
Okay, well, I've had a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon.
Have a good.
Welcome to Vassals of Kingsgrave. This episode will be dedicated to the popular movie and book Gone with the Wind. My name is Glenn, and Dagos Rivers from the forums, and joining me is Bina 007.
Hi, everybody.
So for those that don't know, I guess just a brief description of the plot. It's a book which was published in 1936, and the book focuses on the main character, Scarlett O'Hara, as she goes from husband to husband during the American Civil War and Reconstruction period. Eventually, so she marries 3 husbands and has a child by each husband, all at the same time pining after a man that marries his cousin. So she is in love with Ashley Hamilton, and he marries his cousin, Melanie Hamilton. And let's say that would be my just brief description of the plot. But anything to add, Bina?